Welcome from my side for this webinar today. My name is Karen Fischenbeck and I'm Secretary General of BIAN. It's my great pleasure to facilitate this session and to give you an update on the service landscape, and especially one example of adoption of the service landscape as a reference by SAP. I'm happy to have Peter Jensen with me. He is Head of Architecture, Financial Services at SAP, and he will give us some insight into how SAP is using the BIAN Service Landscape as one of the BIAN members. So last time, some of you may have joined the latest session, where we had our colleagues from ING in the call, outlining the BIAN Service Landscape in more detail and introducing the service landscape to you, in addition to the documents that are aligned with it, like the meta model and the how-to guide. What I would like to do is encourage you to have a look at the service landscape yourself. So maybe you've already downloaded the documents from the BIAN web page, and it would be great if you were able to assess and explore this landscape and give us your feedback, because this is now the unique opportunity for you to guide us through the next stage. As you may know, we are going to come up with an enhanced version end of this year to be published early next year. And of course, we value your feedback, and this is exactly the right time to let us know what your priorities are and where you think that some of the enhancements should be done. It is work in progress, of course. It's a living document, and it only lives by from the contribution of the members and non-members of BIAN. Right, so before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. As you can see, the session is recorded, and some of you may have seen that there are recorded sessions available on the BIAN webpage already. So if you missed any of these sessions, the previous sessions that we have every month, please feel free to have a look at them at the recordings on the website. For questions, if you have any questions, all the participants are expected to be on mute. So if you would like to unmute your phone, please use *6 and give us your questions, because Jens will also be happy to have an interactive debate and discussion, and he really looks forward to your questions, your comments on what he is going to say. Alternatively, of course, you will be able to use the chat function here that you can see on the right-hand side. Just drop us a note, and we will be happy to read the question and incorporate this as we go along. At the end, of course, you will have, as always, a comprehensive question and answer session. So depending on your questions on the fly, we will be able to answer more questions at the end. And of course, if you have any comments after that, feel free to drop us a note, and we will be happy to get back to you. So before we start with the SAP adoption, I will give you just a couple of key points around BIAN. Most of you know this probably already. Just for those who don't, BIAN is a community. It's a not-for-profit association, and banks and partners work together basically to create an open standard. And the focus of this is the what we call semantic definition of standardized IT services. This is the common language that we're all looking for. One topic, one asset, an artifact that we're having here is the service landscape. And we will hear more about the usage of the service landscape. You will also find more information in this how-to guide and the meta model that is aligned with it. Of course, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're cooperating with existing standards that are relevant for banking, like ISO 20022, IFX Forum, and the Open Group with the TOGAF framework. And of course, an open standard and an emergent standard will be well, depending on the adoption, really a broad adoption, that will lead us to a de facto standard for the banking industry. So we know that quite a few banks are adopting, and partners, of course, are adopting the service landscape and using it as a reference. So we would like to encourage you to do so and to really help us establish this standard. As you can see on the top of the page, on the right-hand side, there are a couple of banks very active, and we can see the names already on the page, like UniCredit also joining us today for this call, ING, Scotiabank from Canada, Standard Bank of South Africa, and Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And what we haven't announced yet is Kutscher from the north of Spain, along with Deutsche Bank, Postbank, and Zürcher Kantonalbank. So more and more banks and partners are joining, which is great. Of course, we look forward to having more banks and more partners involved. And as you can see on the bottom, this is also adopted by the BIAN members, by the software and services partners, including SAP that we have as an example for today's session. What is the value of the banks and the partners? So in the end, what we would like to achieve is an easy integration of existing application landscapes and software solutions that are provided by the vendors. So if this is based on the same foundation, it will be easier to integrate, much easier as today. Of course, the reference landscape can be used already, and we will see an example of this usage just in a minute. As we saw last time, the service landscape team within BIAN is a very active one, closely aligned with the service definition teams like analytics, business part or party, lending, and payments. And of course, we all work towards the same goal, a commonly accepted service landscape. So this is the service landscape version 1.5 that was published early July. As you can see here, the main elements of the service landscape is the business areas, as you can see here, like reference data, sales and service, operations, executions, and so on. The business domains and the service domains. And in BIAN, we feel that the service domains are those that really these elements that can be standardized across the different banks and the bank types, because they represent a generic business capability. And what we try to do is really to create and define these service domains, and we will hear more about it in a minute. So I'd be happy to hand over to Jens Peter, and he will be sharing with us how SAP is using the service landscape, the latest version, and we were also happy to receive feedback on it as we enhance the service landscape towards the next version. Yes, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karin, and well, thanks from my side for the opportunity to share our first experience with the BIAN Service Landscape here in this forum. And yeah, I'm looking forward for your feedback and any discussion topic you may have. Briefly to my person, so I'm heading the industry sector financial service architecture team, which means covering the industries of banking and insurance. My background is the one of a banker, so risk manager actually of a European Tier 1 bank, and I'm now for 13 years with SAP. SAP is very much convinced that standardization in the industry is key as an enabler for speed of innovation and efficiency gains. I think we show that with lots of investments, with our investment roadmap from the past. So, and with this in mind, SAP supports the BIAN initiative from the very beginning on. The goal now of this presentation is to show how the currently available content from BIAN, so the service landscape in its latest version, can be turned into value for the banking industry. I could also formulate a bit in another way, so how the available content from BIAN can be turned into value for SAP and our customers. Of course, there's also a business case in for us and for all the banks, same as for other software vendors. So our agenda is, I would like to briefly introduce SAP for banking to set the scene, and then introduce the SAP for banking solution architecture. So that is then both required as a cornerstone to understand how we approach the usage of the BIAN Service Landscape. So I then map our activities to the BIAN Service Landscape and will show 3 use cases where it plays a role in our modeling activities. The one is the topic of the business process model. Secondly, a so-called message flow model, which I will introduce later. And the last scenario is to show how the BIAN Service Landscape can be used as reference to understand scope and coverage of the SAP software solutions. So, first aspect is SAP for banking. So what is it? So what do we have, first of all, on our solution portfolio side? So overall, SAP offers a homogeneous solution portfolio covering multiple industries and supporting not only B2B business in an industry, but actually multi-industry value chains. And what you see here is a view on this overall portfolio related to our solution offerings for bank. So it's a very high-level view. Normally, even in the first slide, we would be more granular. But for the sake of this discussion, I think it's okay to start very broadly. So the solution portfolio is meant to cover the requirements from retail and corporate banks around the globe of any size. So it starts with channel applications like mobile banking, internet banking, call center applications. Then goes to customer relationship management, so 360-degree view on the customer and managing the customer lifecycle. Then it comes to the transactional banking portfolio, so topics like loans management, savings account deposits, checking accounts, collateral management, and so on. Analytical banking, I would say 2 main areas to mention. The one is finance and risk, very much valuation oriented, so IFRS topics, Basel II, credit risk, liquidity risk, and so on. And then that complemented with topics from our enterprise level management like planning, strategic management, financial performance management. Application-wise, this is complemented by enterprise resource planning, where the typical, for a bank, the typical business support functions are hosted as human capital management or procurement and others. All this is based on the same integration infrastructure, also sold from a product perspective, and business intelligence tools from a business process management, or tools for enterprise service bus oriented capabilities. Retail core banking is typically a good benchmark now to understand in how far we, from an application perspective, do not only have cross-industry solutions, but only have a focus on banking specific, so banking industry specific solutions. So if we look here at the quotes from analysts like Gartner, or here in this case shown from Gartner and from Ovum, so we do not only contribute software in a banking specific mode, but I think we have achieved a leading position in providing innovative solutions to the market in the area of banking industry specific solutions. Overall, we serve with this 2,500 banks or more in 120 countries, so it's really around the globe, any size, retail and corporate banking. First topic for us, before we come now to modeling related topic, is to start one step in before, and that is what is, from an architecture perspective, the basis for this solution portfolio. So the sound comprehensive architecture management is, from our point of view, really essential for the lifecycle management of the solution portfolio. So on our side, that means on the SAP side, same as for the lifecycle management on the customer side. So why is it that important? So in a nutshell it is, we want to prepare for the unknown. So probably there are very simple architectures if we knew already everything we would need to cater for. Well, but there are innovations out there both on the business side as well as on the technological side we would like to prepare for, to incorporate that as value add in the future. And there's of course where we as architecture then, from an architecture perspective, need to prepare for. So from the key business requirements one could use now to retake as an input is, as I introduced earlier, prepare for innovations from a business perspective, so be agile there. That is what we would like to support. And secondly, of course, the requirement for efficiency and to become more and more efficient over time. That translates into architecture, several architecture requirements, and we have a kind of a hierarchy of requirements here we work with. And I would like to only show you the very top level. We talk here with an SAP and especially in banking. And the very first one is openness. Very important. So we are aware as SAP that we are not the only provider of applications to a bank, but that a bank will have a myriad of applications in place from different vendors and in-house development, originating from different technologies and from different times, so that interoperability from a semantic as well as from a technological perspective is key. Secondly is extensibility. So we offer solutions with a very broad functional coverage. So we've learned that from several customers, but of course there are functionalities which do not qualify for standard, or which are new, or we haven't been able to implement so far. So we need controlled extension points in our applications so that a customer can respond to these business needs from a functional perspective, and at the same time still have the advantage of what a customer expects from a standard software. Maintainability, upgradability, these topics, why he's going for standard software. Third aspect is flexibility as a requirement. So we want to be able to use a specific set of functions in a variety of different use cases. So with the business context, with all its different flavors. So let's take an example of loans management. That happens in retail banking and wholesale banking. It happens secured or unsecured, in a very automated manner processed or very individualized with manual intervention. And so if the requirements for the key capabilities are the same, we want to reuse these capabilities and develop them only once. And the fourth aspect is the one of abstraction, which leads us now here to the modeling topic. So we would like to be able to manage the business capabilities in a very effective and transparent way. So documentation just in Word, or to go through lines of code and to read through what has been developed is not sufficient to understand and to manage business requirements over a life cycle. So we look for a structured way, predefined artifacts, clear notation, so that we are here better prepared for a management along and over time with changing business needs. So all this, first of all, translates into an application architecture blueprint, so which is illustrated here in the typical way of horizontal and vertical layering. But this is really driving our solution development, that kind of layering where we say horizontal-wise we separate front-end, collaboration, process management, and the business functionality. So with a service-based interaction between these layers, and vertical layering here referring to the fact that for the different pieces of business functionality, they can again be used, they can be deployed in an independent manner. So the usage of one piece of functionality is no prerequisite for the usage of the second one, or vice versa. So independent sets of business functionality, again, as soon as communication is required, that this happens then in a decoupled, controlled way via enterprise services. So that is the architecture pattern we work with on a very high level. Now, and if we now look at this abstraction piece and translate that into the model-related requirements, then we would say we have partly model-driven development. I personally like more the approach when we compare that what we are doing to a model-based development. So the starting point is a clear decoupling of the business content we are working on from the technology or so-called container, so that we talk about here a decoupling of content and container. That is one of our starting points, and via that, of course, we are better prepared to manage the change, whether it is happening on the business requirement side or on the technology side. Good example currently for the technology side is what is happening for in-memory computing. And so a new technological opportunity. We, from an SAP perspective, adopt, drive, and of course then put the respective content to that technological innovation as far as existing scenarios are concerned. As soon as new scenarios are now possible, of course, this will also lead to new content. The models themselves are based on a binding methodology. So we have a methodology group here defining the methodology end-to-end across all artifacts. And that is then for the different groups who are involved in the modeling activities key to stick to that. What we try to do is wherever a standard is available in the market, we base this methodology on the standards. So where it's not available, we actually even try to drive it to a standard and not work on our own methodology. Important that also the model, so that means the content can be reused from an interoperability perspective and from a lifecycle management perspective. So the models themselves then cover end-to-end lifecycle in terms of software development and implementation on the customer side. It starts with business-related models. So what would a business actually have as a requirement? And it ends with the software design models, and that are the most granular models then on a software level which we ship then to the market. What we use in between are, we call it internally the transformation models, one could also say software analysis models. I will introduce later on what we mean by that. So if you're now interested, so in a bit more in detail, what we mean by these models, so we are fairly open in disclosing the content of these models. So lots of content is available at the Enterprise Service Workplace. There is a link here in the presentation where you can go to and have a look at all this different content. Now, from a process perspective, so I've introduced these phases before. So the approach is that we first of all, on our side, have detected that we would like to extend the software we have, would like to build a new solution in some areas. So starting point is to understand the business requirements so that we understand the business process. This can be modeled. We would then go into a software analysis phase where we translate this into first software-oriented models, which are not that detailed that they give you the details of the functions and features happening in a single component. That would happen on a software design level. So after we have then developed, it will be documented. We again translate that into a software analysis model. Now a different one, because the first one was a roll-in one. We may not have developed everything, or we may have developed it different from the way how the software analysis model assumed it. So that means it can be brought back into the same modeling notation, but it is finally a different model we deliver. Customer then in the next phase, we assume takes this as a content, as an input to look at the business process to say, does it fit to me? And then adjust the process to the specific needs and again, adjust the software analysis models to the specific needs. Software design works a bit different. That is more a parameterization now of the solution based on what we deliver in standard. Again, you would document that and then prepare for the rollout of the solution in the bank. So we go through such a cycle here, this V form here, we go more or less 2 times, one on the SAP side and one on the customer side. Reusing the content and adapting it to the user in the specific context he is in. So that is the approach we are taking from a phase perspective. Another question, the next topic is, what are the models involved in that phase, or in the different phases? From a business process side, well, the key model is the business process. We then translate it into platform-independent models which take into account, that we finally would like to respond with software to these to the business process. And here the service domains are taken out of the service landscape play an important role. The service domain or the service landscape provides a static view, so we just learn which capabilities are available or are required. As soon as we put that into a business context, so animate that via a business process, we call that a message flow model. So the message flow model itself then goes down to single messages versus the business process just shows the activities which are going on. And in this context, the service domains are heavily used on our side. We will see an example later on for this. Based on these 2 models then, service domain and message flow model, we come to the SAP software, so we have then the platform-dependent models. The static view, that means without having a process context, these are process components with the inside business object and the exposed service interfaces down to the service operations, so here abbreviation the services. As soon as you would like to see that a bit from a context perspective, one of the typical models we use is a so-called process component interaction model. Again, if you're interested, go to the Enterprise Service Workplace, you will see that there. So we have here a combination of static models and dynamic models, but be sure this is really just this is a selection of a much broader view from our taxonomy perspective, but the ones which are now important in the context here of the service domain discussion. So when we look at where we are currently in realizing all this content, then we are far ahead in the software design models, also similar to the evolvement of the standards here from BIAN. We have an evolving content for the software analysis and for the business process models. So the service landscape now, to come here to the use cases, they play, as we have seen now on the page and before, a vital role in our modeling activities. So they are important for us from a lifecycle management, not only actually for us, but we assume it also being relevant then for our customers as soon as for the banks as soon as they implement our software. One of the first analysis we did is in how far can this actually be developed or provided in standard, and especially the static models we have seen on the page and before, we assume that these models qualify for standard. So we have learned that the vast majority of the capabilities to run a bank, or to manage a bank, they do not differ around the globe, across the different types of banks. So the key capabilities are required in a very similar way. This does not mean that the business processes, that mean the context in which the capabilities are used, are standard to the same extent. So there are much more variants out there as soon as I animate these capabilities and reuse them in their specific business context. So in that area, there are much more differences from bank to bank, especially bank type to bank type, and from region to region. So my conclusion was, static capabilities as documented by the service landscape and as it is one of the key focuses from BIAN that qualifies for standard. So that is why we, of course, also as SAP supported and drove here the initiative to set a standard here across the industry. Plays from our perspective a very critical role in the alignment between business and IT. So we are same from a software vendor perspective, so the same, I think, challenge as if you are in the bank on the business side, so that we talk the same language, business and IT. That is a challenge. Service domains have been proven from our perspective, especially with the banks we have had discussion with, that it allows an understanding on both sides and an application of both sides on the business as well as on the IT side. So in both areas, business and IT can use it to establish a link to their dynamic models, and the dynamic models in business and IT are actually different ones. In addition, one of the key questions on our side was also, which we analyzed, was in which phases of the life cycle do we use it, of the software and business life cycle. So is it just one point in time? So is it at a specific phase? So what you've seen in this V structure in before, roll in, roll out, is that we can use it as a structuring element very early when it comes to our portfolio cases, so before we have made a decision what to develop, up until the shipment of our software. And same, it can be used. We learned that from our consulting arm organization here within SAP, and proved that it can be used also when it comes then to the business cases on the bank side. So value engineering, early business cases there, actually up to operations as a reference for the different activities. As one reference, I need to say, there are then also others, of course. For the BIAN Service Landscape, it's a bit difficult, of course, to read that, and it is not meant now here from my side to go through the details. What we did when we looked at the BIAN Service Landscape in the version 1.5 and to use it in our world, the first thing was we didn't start at zero, so we had a service landscape already in before. It was called differently, but it had the same purpose. So the question for us was then, in how far can we use this service landscape now from BIAN in a one-to-one manner? And so that means we went through every single service domain as it is proposed by BIAN and to assess it and how far it fits to our needs and to our experiences. The outcome was that, well, it is actually fairly close, so that we would have structured it maybe a bit differently, but if we look at the single service domains, it is very close. So we can reuse most of the content, and we can work with most of the content, but it is not a one-to-one. There are some areas, and I think it is due to the fact that in BIAN not all service domains are ready yet. There are lots of candidates in which still require discussion in BIAN. So there are some areas where we just have different experiences and would have difficulties to adopt the content in the way how it is proposed today. So that is why we did for these specific areas then an adoption to cater for our currently specific needs. One of the additional aspects was, well, a different grouping. That means more communication aspect. The service domains do not differ, but on a business domain level, we come to a different setup. From our perspective, that has more communication-related. There's more communication-related issue. We are more concerned about the first fact that we, in some areas, service domain-related, have different experiences. So this is how the service landscape on our side looks like. Just from a visual perspective, you can see very similar. And that is, well, actually true. It is very similar. Most of the service domains could be reused. Most of the structures could be reused. So well done from BIAN here, and a good fit to our experience. But as I said, there are areas which need, from our perspective, further discussions, and I just highlight here four of these areas that are the main ones from my perspective. The first one is the area of channels. We have here, that has been detected also or defined by BIAN as one of the future areas which potentially need refinement. And so we today use a different structure there. There are some other areas also in like business development where we did not find all the capabilities we need to model our business. We could very well live with what is here modeled under operations and execution. So of course for us it was key to understand how far our core banking solutions are based on similar experiences. So there were only minor adjustments there. On analytics and risk side, again, more adjustments. So from our perspective, we have gained lots of experiences in some solution areas which are not yet reflected or adequately in enough depth discussed in BIAN. Well, business support in general is a one-to-one agreement, but there's one area where more really cross-service landscape capabilities are there, which support here fairly generic capabilities, and I think there's also some discussion demand within BIAN. So that should give you here an impression on how close are we in our understanding. So that means we look forward here to taking up here these topics and feedback from SAP for the next BIAN release. Okay, with this I would like to come to the 3 use cases where we apply this service landscape. The first is the business process model. The business process model, I just would like to show here one example, saving account opening with card. A business process model is meant that the business understands it and says, these are my requirements. So business analysts discuss this with the business owners and to get a sign-off there. And we use the service domains that, from a business process perspective, we talk early about what is the area we expect to come the capabilities from required to support this business process. So when I have anything to do with the customer interaction, I probably need something like party data management. As soon as I go through a sales process, I need to have something like an offer management available. This is something which is easily feasible for anybody on the business side. So typically there are just a dozen or so of service domains his typical business has to deal with. Across the bank, of course, all service domains, but very selected service domains from a concrete process perspective. But this is an important alignment, early alignment, to have an idea of what the business process is actually about. And this is an approach we in SAP live, so that we do not just have a really neutral definition of the business process, but we assign the business process steps or the activities to service domains. We do not talk about anything of messaging. Yeah, it's just the flow of activities we are talking about. The second step then is that we drill this down, and on the second side it is a model which is now relates to somebody on the IT side who would like to understand and what are the messages between all these different service domains. So this model is something which typically is much more detailed than a process, or much larger. We need a more hierarchy view also on that. And what we see is every single message which is flying around between the different service domains involved. In most cases, or for most areas, this works quite well. There's one specific area we discuss here currently, or not just discuss, where we had lots of discussions in, but now have a specific way how to respond to that. And that is as soon as we have on the back-end side a more orchestration-related request. So that means I have, from a channel perspective, a simple service which I ask for, but this service request goes to a variety of different service domains and where you need a feedback. This is when orchestration is required, and we have a dedicated lane then to deal with these orchestration requests, and this is called here process object, and is a dedicated lane which comes as an additional pool in the BPMN notation here, in addition to the pools we allow on the business process side. So all notation is based on BPMN. We think that it is important here that we stick to standards, simplified requirements there for the business process, and we need more of the BPMN capabilities, so the full set of available elements for the message flow model. As soon as we have this, then it is handed over to the software design and can go there into realization, versus these models are used in the implementation, are there the basis then for the design of the solution. Okay. Next step is when we have all these service domains that we try to understand, and how far does SAP now cover these capabilities. So when we map the service domains used in these processes, these are just highlighted here. So for a call center related saving account process, we need, of course, party data management, call center, offer management, deposit account, card management, and correspondence. This was, from a process modeling perspective, identified. And typical question from a customer is, and how far do you support this? And this is what can be illustrated best via here a view on the simplified meta model. So what we do is we have a mapping from the service domains to our platform-related models. That means the business objects, process components, and services. So same as we assume that a service domain stands for its own and can be used in a heterogeneous environment, any process component delivered by SAP assumes that it stands for its own and can be deployed in a heterogeneous environment. So heterogeneous means with other service or other process components coming from any vendor. And so that is why we have this mapping that we say we have on the service domain side, for example, party data management. That was just the first service domain here mentioned from BIAN. And we then have the related process component from SAP. And of course, the question is, how well does it fit? The description, of course, does not need to be identical, but the BIAN description is the benchmark then for us to understand the capabilities. If we look at the business objects with business partner and business partner relationship, we see that we are quite close to what also BIAN expects here, with the focus objects defined for the service domain. And then when it comes to the service operations, there is actually even a more detailed mapping one could do. So typical service operations you would expect here, the create, read, update, inform, find, and so on, for the object business partner and business partner relationship. Actually, in the case of party data management, we could do now a more detailed mapping also to this level, because BIAN offers there more detailed content. For most service domains today, BIAN stays with a description so that we cannot go further down to detailed business objects, and we can definitely then not go down to a service operation level to do a mapping. But to the level which is feasible, we do this mapping, and via that are in a position to easily communicate our coverage and related to the status BIAN has achieved. So with that, I would like to come to a brief conclusion and summary. So the BIAN Service Landscape targets, from our perspective, a very critical element for the lifecycle management for both business and IT. So we used a very similar model already in before, and are very happy that now a standardized, so the standardization initiative is there to provide this. So there's no alternative model available from our side, so especially not one with a comparable ambition and not one with a comparable industry support. So that means that if you look at the current status, it already adds substantial value, otherwise we would not use that from a standard development perspective. For our activities within SAP, and via that, of course, also for our customers. The BIAN 1.5 adoption, well, we use since July 1st. Was not earlier possible for us, of course, given the publishing date from BIAN. And so what you've seen is now an early transformation of existing models into BIAN compliant models, given the version 1.5. However, there were adjustments necessary for us that we were able to apply that. And that is, of course, one of our expectations for the future. What we trust and are fully supportive there, that BIAN will broaden and deepen the scope up to a level that really a broad and full standard for the banking industry emerges out of this activity. Yeah, and with that, I am through with my presentation and happy to start the discussion with you and to respond to any question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. And I think it was very valuable to get your observations and your considerations that you went through assessing the BIAN Service Landscape. And I'm sure that this has sparked off quite some thoughts with our participants on our session today. So I know that we've got a few banks on the call as well as vendors. So before we share some sources of additional information with you, I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask Jens, as our expert right now, whether you have any immediate questions. So is there any question in the audience, from the audience right now? If we're unable to talk, I'm not quite sure whether everybody is unmuted already. Feel free to use the chat function. I think we had one question before that was raised in the morning session, and there was the question around how do the banks, the clients of software vendors, benefit from what SAP is doing or other software vendors are doing, adopting the BIAN assets. Would you have any immediate response? I mean, you've covered some of that in the presentation already, just the main points maybe, Jens?
Yeah. So I would assume that as soon as you as a bank are in a position to select vendors based on service domains taken out of a service landscape, that gives you an enormous power, an instrument for really a consistent management of your application landscape. And that comes from the fact that, of course, integration effort is heavily reduced, and there's early clarity on what vendors deliver and bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And that means that is our commitment, that we contribute to that with our software, and the contribution is visible via our mapping to the service landscape. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, the power of this increases the more applications are available based on this structure, based on the standard, and actively contribute to that. So I think a first step is done, but lots of steps have to follow.
Yeah, and I look forward to the discussions that we're going to have. I remember some of them where we came up with the latest version of the service landscape. So I'm sure we're going to have fruitful discussions among the teams as well. So just briefly, where do you find more information about BIAN and about the artifacts that we were talking about? You will be able to download the results. You've probably seen that already on our webpage. Of course, we would be more than happy to arrange individual sessions for you and for your teams if you have specific topics that you would like to discuss in more detail. So feel free to drop us a note and we'd be happy to get back to you. Of course, we will be present at the upcoming events like Cybus in Toronto in Canada in September. There will be member-hosted events. For instance, Jens, you will be available at the international, or not international, at the German-speaking this time, SAP Banking Conference in Mainz in August. And of course, well, we will also be present this time for the first time at the Euro Finance Week in Frankfurt, mid-November. So if you would like to meet our experts and start discussions or give us your feedback, this is also very welcome. You will find the link in the slide deck, which will be sent around and made available on the web page. So if you would like to complete the service and give us your feedback and your comments, this is highly appreciated and it will be very valuable for us going forward. Of course, you can also drop us a note if that is more comprehensive feedback, and we would also be happy to arrange specific sessions if there are specific topics that you would like to address. So with this, just question to the audience, whether there are any immediate questions that have come to your mind. So this is not the case. So thank you very much for your interest in BIAN and also the adoption by one of the BIAN members. We're going to have more webinars in the near future. This will be announced, as you have seen here, at our webpage. So watch out for that, and I look forward to meeting you virtually or in person at